Welcome, everyone. My name is Liz Francis, and I'm the publisher of a new independent publishing company called Street Noise Books. We focus primarily on nonfiction graphic novels, and we strive to create books that are unapologetic, authentic, and politically relevant. I'd like to thank you all for joining me, and I'd like to thank the folks at San Diego Comic-Con who are bringing this panel to you as part of their Comic-Con at Home programming. Welcome to the Comics for Justice panel. Today, we will explore questions like, do comics have the power to make real change in the world? And what is the effect of telling your truth in your art and comics panels? Our panelists have each been working in their own way to shed light on the human condition in some of the most troubled places in the world. It is such an honor for me to be here with this incredibly talented group of courageous artists. And I'm delighted to bring these people together today to share some of their process with us. Let me introduce you to these four amazing people. First up, we have Sarah Glidden. Sarah is a nonfiction cartoonist and illustrator living in Brooklyn, New York. Her graphic novels include How to Understand Israel in 60 Days or Less, which was featured in the Best American Comics series, and Rolling Blackouts, which was a New York Times bestseller. Her short comics articles have appeared in The Guardian, The Nib, Topic, and a variety of other publications. And then we have Carlos Latuff. Carlos describes himself as a Brazilian political cartoonist and a friend of the Palestinians. His work confronts political oppressors and dictators around the globe, and he has gotten the attention of the media all around the world. His political cartoons were published in a collection called Drawing Attention to the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, Political Cartoons by Carlos Latuff. And then we're happy to have Sarah Merk. Sarah is a comics journalist and somewhat obsessive zine maker. She is a digital producer at the Center for Investigative Reporting, a contributing editor for The Nib, and the author of several books, including Guantanamo Voices, True Accounts from the World's Most Infamous Prison, which the New York Times named as one of the 10 best graphic novels of 2020. And last but not least, we have Mohammad Sabaaneh. Mohammad is a Palestinian cartoonist. He is the principal political cartoonist for the Palestinian Authority's daily newspaper, Al Hayat al-Jadida, and is a former political prisoner in Israel. Mohammad's work has been included in international art fairs around the world. He recently received his master's degree on a Chevening scholarship from the University of Creative Art in London, UK. And he currently lives in Ramallah in the West Bank. He's the author of Power Born of Dreams, My Story is Palestine, which will be published by Street Noise Books in September. So, welcome everyone. For the purposes of this discussion, I thought it might be helpful to start out by identifying three different categories or types of comics in which our panelists work to address issues of justice. They are political cartoons, comics journalism, and graphic narrative nonfiction or memoir. Now, let's meet our panelists. Let's start with Sarah Glidden. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Your book, Rolling Blackouts, what category would you put that in? And would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I guess that would be in maybe both categories of comics journalism and narrative nonfiction. The first book, which is about Israel and Palestine, was more of a memoir. It was more subjective. But Rolling Blackouts, I'm still in it as a character, but I'm just kind of there to tell the story. For that book, I went with a team of freelance reporters from the United States to Turkey, Northern Iraq, and Syria, where they were going to be reporting on Iraqi refugees and internally displaced people. So my role was there to be kind of an observer of the journalists and to investigate what is journalism and how does it work? What are the limitations of American journalism when you're talking about the Middle East and the conflicts that, you know, our country started, and trying to show the stories of the people that they interviewed as well. So there's a bunch of layers there, and my voice is in there, but I tried to kind of hang back and be more of a narrator and kind of inject less of my own thoughts and feelings into that one. But it is journalism. All of the dialogue in the book is, you know, taken from recorded audio, edited, but it's all real. You know, everything is, I had like a very journalistically rigorous process for working on the book. So I do consider it journalism. Yeah.
Do you have a feeling about which way of working you prefer, or which way you think is more effective in generating empathy or, you know, spreading compassion around the world? Like, is there, since you've done both?
I mean, it depends on the subject matter, how you're approaching it. I do enjoy the kind of memoir approach, especially when it comes to just being able to think about things and to put those thoughts into words and pictures. But as far as the efficacy of the different kinds of nonfiction, you know, I think that really depends on who's doing it and in what way. But I think that among all the people doing comics journalism or even editorial cartoons that I know, what's most important to those people is getting the truth out, is trying to be fair, and a real passion about the people that they're reporting on and the issues that they're reporting on. And I think that comes through no matter what kind of comics you're doing.
Interesting. I love both books. So, and it's just so interesting that you've done both so well, you know.
Try my best.
No, it's amazing. And Carlos, welcome from Brazil. You're down in the southern part of Brazil, right? That's why you're wearing a winter coat when we're all in the hot of the summer. Is that right?
Yeah. We are reaching the winter here. As I already told you, it's not that cold like in places in the United States in the winter, but for the Brazilian standards, yes, it's cold.
Now you work primarily in political cartoons, right? What drew you to that medium? Why is that your thing?
Well, this kind of style is something I use it to apply to express myself since I was a kid. So I think the best way to share my views, my ideas, better than writing, it's drawing. So my main influence for being a political cartoonist was not political. In fact, when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time in front of a TV watching Hanna-Barbera cartoons, and my parents used to buy Mad magazine for me because in Brazil we had a Brazilian version translated for the Portuguese. And in the 90s, when I started to work for trade union bulletins, I started to have contact with political content, political topics. And then I decided to make something more political, a more political approach, cartoons with political topics.
I noticed, I mean, obviously now your cartoons get looked at by people all around the world, but that's because of the reach of the internet. Were you doing political cartooning before the internet? or no?
Yeah. In the 90s, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Because in Brazil, the internet arrived 1996.
Okay.
And 1995, something like this. And before internet, I used to make political cartoons for these bulletins I told you about from leftist trade unions.
Oh, I see. Right. And have you found, I mean, I imagine that it's been quite different now that you get seen around the world. Like you must have, it must just be such a different experience to be knowing that your work is being reacted to in France, in the United States, in Palestine, in all sorts of places. It must be really powerful, I would think.
I used to say the purpose of a political cartoon is basically editorial. You publish cartoons in newspapers and books and magazines, but with the development of the internet, we have a more broad audience. We have the possibility to reach a large audience. And especially now with the mobile phones, with a more, fast connection, internet connection, and the social medias, it's possible to reach yet more people. And when you associate the content with the internet, because it's not to have a fast connection or access to social medias is not enough when your content is not relevant. So when you decide, for example, in my case, to make cartoons about Israel and Palestine, and these cartoons you won't see on the mainstream media, this content is more special for the audience, and people tend to share more this kind of content. And I feel myself very proud when I see protesters all around the world using my cartoons in banners, in T-shirts, in placards, because they are using my cartoons as weapons. So those activists, those people who are gathering the streets on behalf of Palestinians, when they are using my cartoons, they are using these cartoons the same way they could use a weapon. So it's very important. It's very strong, So I feel myself very, very happy, very proud to have my cartoons being used this way.
Yes, well, they say knowledge is power, right? And those images are so sometimes can speak louder than words. Like they can reach across different languages because the images themselves are so powerful. People understand the symbolism, and it can cross barriers and be powerful, whether it's used as a protest sign or just to spread knowledge and sort of like underground resistance building or revolution building worldwide, which is very powerful. Mohammad, you also work in political cartoons, and are you doing it every day for the newspaper still, or?
Yeah, actually I do every day. I have to do maybe sometime 2 or 3 cartoons for the newspapers, besides my work in the university as a lecturer. But with all of these conditions in Palestine, you could find a lot of problems, a lot of things to talk about with your cartoons.
Oh, I should mention that you're joining us from Ramallah, which is just
Lovely.
I feel it's a lovely place. Yes, I was there 2 years ago. I was so honored to be able to travel to Ramallah on the bus from Jerusalem to meet with Mohamed when I was in the area, and we had a wonderful talk in a beautiful little coffee shop, and I was totally taken by your thoughts and your art, and you had amazing ideas for getting these stories out about Palestinian people. And I've heard you say that you wanted to do the book Power Born of Dreams in order to humanize the Palestinian people in the eyes of the world, because so often they are seen as political symbols or numbers on a page, as opposed to real life, and that the idea of the occupation or the Jewish settlements has real life effects on real life people. And I think it's really such an honor to work with you. Anyway, I'm so glad that you're here from Ramallah and that everything's okay with you and your family. We've been keeping you in our hearts on this side of the world, and hoping that we can push our government to do whatever we can to support the Palestinians.
If they do nothing, that they will support us. Shortly, they will help us if they do nothing, because always they support the Israelis when they do anything. Mm-hmm. And I hope they will do nothing.
Okay, we'll try to do nothing. That should be pretty easy, I would think.
That's fair enough.
Would you like to talk a little bit about the difference, since you've done political cartoons and now you just completed your first graphic novel? Do you have insight into the difference between those processes?
I will start from where you start talk about when you been in Ramallah 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. You have mentioned that you've been in Jerusalem, and now I am 42 years old, and till now I have never been in Jerusalem. It's far away here from Ramallah, just around 20 minutes by car if you want to get to Jerusalem. But because I am a Palestinian, I cannot get into Jerusalem. And that's the real problem for Palestinian, because, the people around the world, they cannot understand exactly how the Palestinian, they live under this atrocity, under this apartheid. I cannot call it even apartheid, as Naum Chomsky have said. If you call Israel an apartheid state, it's a privilege for Israel, because it's more than apartheid states. I've started as a cartoonist because I was born in Kuwait in 1979, and my parents used to use the political cartoon for Naji Al-Ali. You can see his portrait here from some art from my friends in Gaza. He did this portrait for him. And Naji Ali was killed in 1987 because of his political cartoon about Palestine in London. And because, I grew up just seeing his cartoon about Palestine, and I was in Kuwait just thinking about my country and my people. When I finished my high school in Jordan, I've decided that I need to do cartoon. I need to do political cartoon. Then I traveled to Palestine. I was lucky because I have Israeli identity or permission from Israel to live in West Bank. I've decided that I need to move from Jordan. After the first Gulf War, we moved from Kuwait to Jordan, and then from Jordan to Palestine. I've started my bachelor degree in Al-Najah University in Nablus. At that time, the second intifada, the meaning of intifada is the uprising against the Israeli. The second intifada was started in the West Bank and Gaza. And I've lost a lot of my friends in the prison, in the Israeli prisons, and they were killed by Israeli soldiers. I've been in a lot of protesting and demonstration here in Palestine, in West Bank, and a lot of my friends they lost their life in all these protesting. And that's why I've insisted that I need to be a political cartoonist to convey all these tragedy for the people around the world. I've started to do some exhibition here in some universities, publishing my work for around 10 years without any revenue, without any salary from the daily newspaper. And then, yeah, I've been a political cartoonist for the Palestinian people. I have a lot of audience. In 2010, I've met my friend Seth Tobokman, and he is an American comics artist. And Ethan is, both of them, they live in Brooklyn, in New York, not in Brooklyn. But they introduced me to the comics. We don't have comics here in Palestine. You've been here in the West Bank and you've seen that we don't have big library or bookstores or all of this kind of thing. I did a small research at that time about the comics and political comics, non-fictional comics, and the biographical comics to know exactly what is the comics is. And then moved back to Palestine, spent all that year, around 4 years, being in the Israeli prison. That's another experience inside the Israeli prison. But when I moved to London to have my master's degree in illustration, I had that time the big library, the big bookstores, artists. I'm a friend of Martin Rosen. He is the Guardian cartoonist, and he has a lot of comics book. That's why when I had that time to do research about the comics and to know exactly how the Israeli and around the world, they use the comics to convey their narrative for the people around the world. And that's why I've decided I need to do comics. I told you 2 years ago that I need to do comics, but I have a lot of obstacles that I don't have time because I work as political cartoonist, daily political cartoonist, and I teach in university. And I have a lot of projects, art projects, printmaking, and all of these things. But in London, and because of coronavirus, I had a lot of time. And that's why I've decided I need to do comics book. I need to start this project to use a new method to convey my narrative and my story for the people around the world.
Thank you. So Sarah Merk, the other Sarah. Hi, how are you doing?
Good.
Your book, Guantanamo Voices, is such an interesting project, and it uses such an innovative format of anthology and comics journalism and graphic nonfiction. And I'm wondering what category you feel that it really falls into, and if you want to talk a little bit more about your work.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say you can see my dog Twyla destroying my house behind me, so just say hi to her as well. And Guantanamo Voices is a work of comics journalism, so I'm in it as kind of a guide. I got to visit the prison at Guantanamo 2 years ago, so I kind of introduced readers to the place and the topic and help guide them through it. But it's all journalism, so it's reported stories and actual quotes, and I try and make that as clear as possible. Even in the subtitle of the book is True Accounts from the World's Most Infamous Prison, because so much of it is unbelievable. It's surreal and terrible and strange, and so I think because it's a comic, people might come to it and think, oh, this is made up or this is exaggerated.
And do you feel that, I mean, I think in one of it's an anthology, which you took stories that you had gathered from people at the prison, right? Various people, like prisoners.
I talked to 10 different people who've spent time at the prison in different capacities. So some former prisoners who were released, as well as lawyers representing people who were incarcerated, and former service members, including people who helped set up the interrogation program, people who worked there for the military. And then each of their stories is illustrated by a different artist. So each chapter is a different voice, and it's also a different visual voice. And sadly, you can't talk to the people who are currently incarcerated in Guantanamo. The government doesn't let you talk to anyone who's in the prison.
Right.
So those voices are missing from the book, and that's by design of the government.
Did you have when you made the decision to make it an anthology instead of having one person draw the whole thing? I mean, you could have drawn the whole thing yourself if you wanted, but what was the purpose behind asking a lot of other people to contribute?
All of my work is collaborative. I love working with various artists, and so this is no different, but I wanted it to feel like it was like a chorus of voices talking about this issue rather than just coming from me. You know, I think it's stronger if you have, you know, a dozen people saying, this is important to us, please take the time to read this, than just one person saying that. And then also because the book is 10 very different experiences, you know, people on both sides of the fence, very different life experiences. I wanted to make sure that like each of those had a different visual voice as well.
Yep. I think it works really well in that way. Okay, now it looks like we have time for some questions from the social media. I hope that'll like spark a little more conversation. I would love to hear you all ask questions of each other if things occur to you. I know that one of the questions that someone asked on Instagram was, when and how were each of you introduced to the world of comics journalism, and which comics journalists have influenced you the most? So this is your time to, you know, be a fan or whatever, give shout outs to your mentors out there. Sarah Glidden, do you wanna?
Well, I mean, I'd have to say Joe Sacco, which would probably be an answer that a lot of comics journalists would give. His book Palestine, which is, I think, his first work of comics journalism, was one of the first comics that I ever read. I mean, I grew up reading newspaper, like funnies, but besides that, I didn't think comics were for me. I was not interested in superhero stuff, which is what we usually get in the US. So I kind of didn't really think about comics being something that I would want to do. And when I was in college, I read stuff like Persepolis by Mirk and Satrapi, Palestine by Joe Sacco, and those were like, wow, you can use comics to talk about serious things. They don't have to be funny and they don't have to be superhero. And it still wasn't something that I thought I could do. You don't look at a Joe Sacco drawing and say, oh, easy, I can do that. But I was very drawn into it. And, you know, I was in college when 9/11 happened. And I know it sounds cliche to say like 9/11 was a turning point for me, but for me, it was a wake-up call. I hadn't been very, I hadn't been paying very much attention to global politics. And as soon as it happened and like the response in the US was like, they want our freedom and they hate us for our freedom, I was like, well, that doesn't sound right. There must be stuff here going on that I don't know about. And so I started just, you know, really wanting to understand our place in the world and, you know, what we've been doing. And of course, once you start looking at that, it's an emotional thing. And so that kind of began my interest in doing reporting and investigating these kinds of questions. But yeah, Joe Sacco is still formative for me. I just finished his new book, Paying the Land, which is about Indigenous tribes in Northern Canada, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
So I think he remains a master for me.
Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, actually, maybe the same, because Joe Sacco here, actually, the most cartoonists or comics artists around the world, the people, the Palestinian here, they know them, Carlos Latuff and Joe Sacco. That's why I had a lot about Joe Sacco. And when I got his first book, it was amazing when I saw that his book about Palestine, and when I read also the introduction from Edward Said, the Palestinian writer and academic. It was amazing that Edward Said wrote about the comics, but also Seth the Bookman, he is one of the wonderful comics artists around the world that I think, because he's very close to my style. And actually, he's the first one who told me about the printmaking technique. I think he doesn't use the printmaking technique and the relief printing, but he introduced me to that and advised me to find this technique and to learn how exactly I can do that. And because I'm not good writer, and I've never read a lot of comics, because during my childhood, we don't have comics book here or graphic novel in most of the Arab countries here. I'm not a good writer to write a comics. And when I saw his comics, it's reflection about the daily life for the American people and the Palestinian people and all of these things. I found my way to do the comics, just to do some story from my life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I might beg to differ. I think you are a good writer, but that's just my opinion as your editor.
Thank you.
I also love Joe Sacco's comics, and then Sarah Glidden's comics too also influenced me. I love your style and your use of color and just like the humanity you bring to every story. So that's helped influence my work. And then, yeah, so thanks for existing. And then also, yeah, I come from a background of like zines and DIY and more like telling your own story. So I started off making diary comics and comics about my own life. And for that, Linda Berry was super influential. I love her work and her approach of just like that artwork is something that anyone can do. And a lot of people talk themselves out of being artists and writing and drawing because they don't think they're good enough, or they don't think they have a story worth telling. So her work really influenced me to be like, no, you can continue.
Yeah, those are all such amazing comics artists that I really, really admire. And part of my inspiration for starting Street Noise Books was all the books that you've all mentioned. I personally, I love nonfiction, graphic novels, whatever they might be, whether they be comics journalism or memoir. And I recognize the power of political cartoons. I'm just blown away by that genre as well. I'm wondering, well, actually it was another question from someone, I think on Twitter or Facebook, who said, which do you think is more effective if it's telling your own story or comics journalism? I guess that's sort of what I had asked Sarah Glidden in the beginning in terms of her two books. But I'm wondering, from all of your perspectives, do you feel that either as a fan or as a creator, which one do you think has more power to change people's minds or affect the world or create compassion? If it's sort of the objectivity of being a comics journalist, and a political cartoonist also is sort of more in that realm, right? Because you're not in it yourself. You've got the objectivity of commenting on what you're seeing around you, versus very much of sort of a memoir where it's coming from sort of your soul and expressing your own experience as a person in the situation yourself. Does anyone have thoughts about that?
I don't believe in hierarchies of medium like that. I think it's all powerful. And it really depends on how you tell the story. You know, I think that people really connect to a strong story. So as long as you're rooting in empathy and like people's lived experiences, whether it's a funny political comic that points out something hypocritical, or a memoir that's sharing a story only you can tell, or a reported story that took you years, all of those can have the power to create cultural change and change the narratives that we tell about ourselves and about society.
From my perspective, I think the most important thing to base on real story, whether if you are talking about your story or journalism, comics, or whatever. The most important thing to base in real story. Yesterday I was talking with one of my friends. He is a writer, and I'm trying now to collect more story from the last war in Gaza, because I do believe that maybe after 1 or 2 years, I have to do something about all these real stories that I have never been there in Gaza, but I can understand exactly what the people there think about that. And that's why I think the most important thing is to base it on real story.
Mm-hmm.
Liz, if you allow me to do so, I was waiting for your call. That's why I didn't say my influences.
Oh, please do. No, please do, Carlos. I want to hear.
So Joe Sacco, for sure, because he is very detailed. He make a very accurate approach on topics. For example, Sarajevo or Gaza. He's very detailed.
Yes.
And I love the way he depicts scenarios, you know, and also his courage. But this courage, I'm going to speak later. Louis Hammacker, who was a political cartoonist during the World War I, and I love his style, a very classic style. And Najee Al-Ali, mentioned by Mohamed. By the way, thank you very much for your kind words, Mohamed. Najee Al-Ali was a very proeminent Palestinian political cartoonist, and these three artists serve as a big influence to my style and the way I tell the stories. About the effectiveness, I already made comics, but I must confess I don't have the proper patience for making comics, because depending of the style, like Joe Sacco, for example, you need to spend a lot of time. It's like making a movie, you know, it's like a storyboard for a movie. Mm-hmm. It's quite complicated. It demands time and patience. And sometimes, especially I'm always dealing with hard news. I don't have the proper time to sit and make a whole comics, you know. So for me, the best way to communicate is the single panel cartoon, you know, to tell the whole story in a single image.
Yeah.
But Liz, the most important thing I think for this effectiveness is the courage, because you may have a very skilled artist, you may even involved in topics, in political topics, but in cases like Israel and Palestine, it requires courage to touch this very sensitive topic, because every time you decide to speak or to draw about Palestine, you are always labeled as an anti-Semite. And many artists are afraid to be blackmailed by Israel advocates, because when you are called an anti-Semite, it's very, you know, it can close doors for you. Mm-hmm. So let's take, for example, the recent tweet from Mark Ruffalo, the actor. He wrote messages and expressed and passed messages, solidarity for Palestine, for Palestinians, but I don't know why exactly, what happened. I can imagine, but I don't know exactly what happened. He wrote on Twitter, "I'm sorry, it was not to say Israel is committing genocide in Palestine is too much. It's feeding anti-Semitism, etc." So it requires courage to be a political cartoonist. So I think that the most important thing for being a political cartoonist is to address a message to an audience is the courage, definitely.
I love that. No, I think that courage is something that you've all four of you have demonstrated in your work. I think that it takes courage to, like you're talking about, Carlos, in political cartoons, but also in putting yourself out there. If you're doing a memoir and you're writing from your heart and you're expressing your own. I remember when I read Sarah Glidden's book, How to Understand Israel in 60 Days or Less, I was really struck by, Sarah, by your vulnerability that you expressed in that book, and you know, showing your own hesitancy, your own learning curve, your own exploring, I think is very brave. I think there's a noble courage in all of the work that all four of you do. And I'm just so much in awe of you all. I wondered if
I had something to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I said Mohammad had something to say.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Just I want to mention something, because I'm representative for CRNI, Cartoonist Right International Network, and just the last 2 years, we more than 10 cartoonists from around the world, they've been accused as anti-Semitic just because they stood with the Palestinian people, like Steve Bell and Martin Rosser from The Guardian, Vasco from Bulgaria, Antonio Antenas from Portuguese. He was working with New York Times at that time, and he published his cartoon in New York Times. And even Avi Katz, he's an Israeli cartoonist. Mm-hmm. And he have published a cartoon against Netanyahu, and he was accused as anti-Semitic just because he criticized his government. Mm-hmm. That's why that's the only thing that I want to add to my friend Carlos Latuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, Eli Valley too, who's an American Jewish cartoonist, who's
he's my friend also.
He has been accused of being anti-Semitic a lot, especially on the internet. And recently, a young AP reporter, I forget her name, I'm sorry, but she was just fired from the AP partly because a right-wing group went after her. And one of the things she was accused of, being part of the Liberation of Palestine group at Stanford, was inviting Eli Valley to give a talk. So that was cited as an example of, see, she's anti-Semitic since she invited this anti-Semitic cartoonist who's, I've seen his books in synagogues before, like he's far from it, but that does happen.
Yeah. Well, another question that we have from the social media sort of plays into this. And someone was asking, what do you think is the socio-political effect of illustrating trauma, and what has been its effect on you personally?
It's a good question. Good question. You know, of course, people abroad knows more about my cartoons because I draw about Palestine, and Palestine is a very hot topic overseas. But before to make cartoons about Palestine, and I was in Palestine in 1998, so I saw things for myself with my own eyes. But before that, and even now, I make cartoons about police brutality in Brazil. Mm-hmm. And it's also a very complicated and very dangerous topic to draw about in Brazil, especially when you have people yet disappear by police, killed by police, tortured by police. Even politicians like Marielle were killed by paramilitary groups linked to the police forces. So it's a very complicated topic. And when I draw some cartoons based on facts, on incidents involved people disappear, torture, kill, sometimes I feel like witnessing the situation. When I'm drawing some kind of cartoon, especially for movements of mothers who lost their sons for police brutality, I feel pain because it's like I'm watching the situation.
Yeah.
So I have a cartoon, a very popular cartoon here in Brazil, and it's like a pietà, a Brazilian pietà.
Okay.
Black mother holding her son killed by a cop in a favela, etc. The kid is wearing a school uniform, etc. And when I made that cartoon, it was like, as I could feel the pain of that mother.
Yeah.
And sometimes some mothers who lost sons killed by cops, they asked me to draw the circumstances when those sons were killed. And it's very difficult for me, it's hard for me to listen to that sad stories, violent stories, and transform those stories in cartoons, in political cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the topic, it's like if I could feel the pain of the victims.
Yes.
Sometimes it's very complicated to be a political cartoonist, I must say.
Yes. Sarah, Merk, do you have thoughts about that, about writing your books and the effect on you?
Yeah, I think drawing someone is such an intimate experience. You know, you're really thinking about their body as you're drawing it. And so anytime I'm drawing a scene that's traumatic, it's very emotional. Yeah, like Carlos was saying, I really connect with, like, here's what their hands looked like, here's what their face looked like, what were they feeling in that moment? Mm-hmm. And in Guantanamo Voices, that was a question I thought about a lot, because if people know one thing about Guantanamo, they probably know about torture and know it's a site of torture. And so I thought a lot about how to deal with that in the book, because the torture is really dehumanizing, and I wanted to present it in a way that didn't dehumanize the people who were tortured. You know, like showing them in these most terrible moments is not something that they would feel good about seeing on the page, probably. And I also didn't want it to feel like a horror comic. You know, if you show so much blood and gore and torture, people can kind of tune it out and just be like, and not feel each moment and with a strong, like, emotional resonance. So I didn't want to show so much torture that it overwhelmed people and made them not feel it, or made it more like about, like, just feel like a horror movie. But then I wanted to show torture because that's the reality. And if you don't show it, then you're glossing it over. And so in the book, it's like 210 pages long, and there's like about 2 pages showing physical torture. And I tried to give those images a lot of space. So there's not very many pictures on the page. And hopefully you feel like, oh, this is like a profound moment that you should sit with and think about for a few minutes. It's not something just to breeze past, but it's something to let sink in and to feel it. And then there's also a couple drawings at the very end of the book that are actually by someone who's currently imprisoned in Guantanamo. His name is Abu Zubaydah, and he actually drew the torture that happened to him. And those cartoons were published in the New York Times. And so I was able to include those at the end as like something to make it more real, to feel like, oh, here's what you read about in the book, and then here's the person who actually experienced this drawing it at the end. And I thought including those was really important to make people feel like, oh, this is a person held a pen and drew this on the page and about what happened to them, and now you can read about it. So I think it's really, really tough. Making this book was very overwhelming for me, and definitely should have talked to a therapist while I was making the book, but instead just like muscled through and got it done. And yeah.
That's something I thought a lot about when I was reading Mohammed's book, because you're drawing yourself going through these experiences again. And I wondered if it was painful for you to replicate those experiences on lino cut, which is very difficult material to even use. And like you're cutting into it and expressing yourself and your feelings. Like, what was that like for you?
Actually, first of all, I've been in the prison in 2013, and from 2013 until now, to 2020, I couldn't think even that I will think about that experience. Always, I try to avoid avoid talking about the Palestinian prisoner because it was very hard for me to think about that time and what exactly now my brother were. Because now, just 1 week ago, the Israeli arrested my brother, and now he is in administrative detention without reason. And always because he's been in the prison for more than 10 times, for more than 9 years. And also when he is there, I'm just restore my experience inside the prison and think about that. And I feel it's very hard to talk about it. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. And to rethink about all of that memory inside the present. But about the linoleum, just to go out from all these details about the linoleum. When I was inside the cell, the Israeli cell inside the Israeli detention center, it is very hard place. You've been in small cell around 1 meter to 2 meters square, without windows, with very rough walls. The door, even it's very heavy metal door, you cannot hear what's going on outside. And with a small dim light, you cannot see exactly what's around you. At that time, I have read some names of Palestinian prisoner. They carved their name with nothing. We have nothing inside the detention center. And till now, I couldn't understand how they carved their name. It was very hard. I tried to do that and I couldn't carve my name there. And that's why I've decided when I wanted to choose the material that I need to carve the story of all the Palestinian prisoners outside the prison for all the people around the world. It wasn't easy for me. I lost my finger during that process. I paid a lot of money to buy all these materials. I spent a lot of time with dealing with all this material, and at that time, some of all of these pages, I've been in the UK, and at that time it was quarantine for the coronavirus. That's why I couldn't go to the place where I can print all of these things. That's why I printed all of the pages without any machines, and that's why I thought that I need to carve all of these pages. I need to carve my people's stories for all the people around the world. That's part of my mission. And when anyone like you understand the process of printmaking, he will realize exactly what I wanted to convey from all of these pages. A lot of pages, a lot of stories. When I finished that book, I found a lot of stories around me. Until now, the last war in Gaza, I was thinking about this small child that was found under the demolished house, and she spent 3 days under that demolished house. I was thinking about her, if she died at that time, or she spent some time alive under that demolished house. All these stories I want to convey for the people around the world. I don't know if it's enough to do one book about my people. I don't know if it's fair just to use printmaking to do that. For my people, I think I should carve a mountain, a big mountain, to convey their narrative. And I will, and we will. And that's exactly what we do. And that's exactly why I traveled around the world and traveled back to my country, because I need to convey a message for this occupier that we, as a Palestinian, we will stand here, we will stay here, we will use whatever we have to convey our narrative.
Well, that is such a powerful message, and I just hope all 4 of you continue doing what you're doing and carving your stories and sharing them and being courageous and telling your truth. I'm completely honored to be here with you. Thank you all for taking this time. I wish we could talk for hours. We'll have to do another panel next time. It's been really wonderful. I hope everyone at home will learn a lot, and this will give them a lot of food for thought. I hope everybody at home checks out all the books by all these amazing authors and the people that they've talked about today. Thank you for joining us. And feel free to follow all of them on Instagram, and you can follow Street Noise Books. And if you have any questions, you can email me personally. My email address is liz@streetnoisebooks.com, and I'd be happy to engage with anyone. So have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks so much to all of you.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you very much.
It's such an honor to talk to you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.